In today's video, we are going to learn about the two past tenses in Spanish. Before we begin to learn about the second past tense, we should review what we've already learned or what you should already know. Let's check your comprehension once again. How many past tenses are there in Spanish? You should have answered two. There are two past tenses in Spanish, and we've already learned and mastered one of those. So let's talk about el pretérito, which you should already know about. El pretérito is also known as the sudden past tense, or ED in English. And this past tense works just like ED in English. I walked, I talked, I parked. And we use the preterito or sudden past tense for actions that happened once in the past. It's very important that you remember once, an action that happened once in the past. I walked, I talked, I parked. It happened once in the past. Here are some examples that I have for you about the preterito or sudden past tense. Ayer yo caminé a la escuela. Yesterday I walked to school. An action that happened once in the past. De repente vi a mi novio con otra chica. Suddenly I saw my boyfriend with another girl. Again, I saw is an action that happened once in the past. Example number 3. Ayer comí cereal, caminé a la escuela y vi a mi novio con otra chica. Yesterday I ate cereal, I walked to school, and I saw my boyfriend with another girl. Again, 3 actions, but they all happened once in the past. We also already know the verb endings for the preterito or sudden past. When a verb ends in a R, like hablar, to talk or to speak, we know which endings we're going to use to match the person who is doing the action. Haste, o, aron, amos. When we have an ER verb, like comer, we know we're going to use the following endings to match the person who is doing the action. Iste, yo, yeron, imos. And lastly, when we have an IR verb like vivir, we know we're going to use the very same endings to match the person who is doing the action. Iste, yo, yeron, imos. We cannot say yo hablar ayer because that means I to speak yesterday. It doesn't make sense in Spanish and it doesn't make sense in English. So we have to change that verb, that ending, and make sure it matches the person we are talking about. Same thing with IR verbs. We cannot say yo comer pizza ayer because that means I to eat pizza yesterday. It doesn't make sense in English and it does not make sense in Spanish. So we have to change those endings to match the person who is doing the action and to also talk about the past tense or the preterito. So here I have an example of using 3 different verbs that we already know. Hablar, comer, vivir. These verbs have already been conjugated or changed to match the person who is doing the action in the sudden past tense or the preterito. So we have yo hablé, tú hablaste, él, ella, usted habló, nosotros hablamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes hablaron. And for comer, we have yo comí, tú comiste, él, ella, usted comió, nosotros comimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comieron. And for vivir, to live, we have yo viví, Tú viviste, él, ella, usted vivió, nosotros vivimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes vivieron. This should all seem very familiar to us because we've already practiced it many times and we've already mastered it. So that is the pretérito or sudden past tense in Spanish. Now we are ready to move on to the second past tense in Spanish, and that is the imperfecto, or the descriptive past. Tense. So the imperfecto or the descriptive past tense also kind of exists in English, and basically it translates to used to or was doing something. And we use this past tense, el imperfecto or the descriptive past, for actions that happened more than, in all caps, more than once in the past, obviously. So again, to clarify, we use the imperfect tense or the descriptive past tense to describe actions that happen more than once in the past. We also use the imperfecto or the descriptive past tense to describe people, situations, feelings, time, and age in the past. It is very important that you remember these two uses of the preterito or imperfecto so that you do not mix it with the use of preterito or sudden past tense. Now here are some examples. Example number 1 says, todos los días yo caminaba a la escuela. Every day I used to walk to school. Again, this describes an action that happened more than once in the past or regularly in the past. Example number 2 says, estaba frustrada porque mi novio estaba con otra chica. I was feeling frustrated, or I used to be frustrated because my boyfriend was with another girl. Again, this is an action that happened more than once in the past, or I'm describing people, situations, feelings, time, and age in the past tense, so I am using the imperfecto or the descriptive past tense. Example number 3 says, era el 25 de abril y tenía 15 años. Eran las 8 de la mañana y hacía frío. The translation is, it was the 25th of April and I was 15 years old. Or, it was 8 a.m. and it was cold. Again, we use the imperfecto here because we are describing people, situations, feelings, time, or age in the past. Awesome. Now that we already talked about the uses of the imperfecto or the descriptive past, we are going to get into conjugating verbs into the imperfecto or changing them so that they match the person who is doing the action. Here I have the verb endings for the imperfecto or descriptive past tense. So for an AR verb like hablar, to talk or to speak, the endings are aba, abas, aba, abamos, an. Say them with me. Aba, abas, aba, abamos, an. So again, when I get an AR verb or a verb that ends with AR and I want to change it into the imperfecto or descriptive past tense, I have to change the ending so that it matches the person who is doing the action. Now, moving on to this second side. If I have an ER verb like comer or vivir, an IR verb, and I need to change them to match the person who is doing the action in the descriptive past tense or imperfecto, fortunately, if the verb ends in ER or IR, I am going to use the same endings regardless of the fact if it ends in ER or IR, as long as I match it with the correct person who is doing the action. So my endings for ER and IR verbs in the imperfecto or descriptive past tense are ia, ias, ia, iamos, ian. One more time, let's say it together. Ia, ias, ia, iamos, ian. I want you to please make a note that all the highlighted verbs for the imperfecto or descriptive past tense have an accent mark. So it's very important that you include those and you don't forget those. I also want you to notice that for AR verbs, yo and el, ella, usted share the same ending. So when you see that, don't get confused. Make sure that you know, and you would know based on the context of a sentence. Same thing for ER and IR verbs. The yo and el, ella, usted form share the same endings. Again, you would be able to distinguish this in a sentence based on context. Okay, so now that we know the uses of the imperfecto or descriptive past tense, and we know the endings that we should use in order to change the verb to match the person who's doing the action, let's practice the skill of conjugating imperfecto verbs using the endings. Okay, so let's start with AR verbs. So I know that I'm going to be using the imperfecto as a fact. Okay, let's assume that. And I know that I have the verb hablar, which ends in AR, so it's an AR verb. Awesome. The very first thing that I need to do, or step one, before I start changing the verbs or conjugating the verb, is I need to ask myself who is doing the action. So my who is already right here. So who is doing the action? Yo is doing the action. Correcto. So step one is to ask myself who is doing the action. Yo is doing the action. Awesome. Okay. Step two is to drop the ending of the verb. So I am going to drop AR, which means to, right? So I'm going to drop AR and I am left with abel. So I write down abel. Now, step three says change the ending to match the person who is doing the action. And once again, who is doing the action in the sentence? Correcto. Yo is doing the action in this sentence. So I'm going to look at my cheat sheet. I'm sorry, I was going to say chart. And I can see that for yo, I am going to use the ending aba. So I am going to write aba. Now, I'm going to do this process with all the other persons. And I am going to get tú hablabas. Él, ella, usted hablaba. Nosotros hablábamos with an accent mark. Ellos, ellas, ustedes hablaban. So I've conjugated hablar in the imperfect tense, and this is the result of that. So I've changed the verb to speak in order to match the person who is doing the action in the descriptive past tense. Now, let's look at comer, which is an ER verb because it ends in ER. I'm going to go through the same process of asking myself the three questions or three steps in order to conjugate or change this verb. So let's do it one more time just for practice. Step 1 says who is doing the action. I know that yo is doing the action. Step 2 says drop the ending. So I'm going to drop the ending and I'm left with com. Now I'm going to go back into my cheat sheet or cheat chart, and I know this is an ER verb, so for yo I am going to use the ending ia. So I am going to write ia. I'm going to do this process with all the other persons for this verb, and it's going to look very repetitive to what we did before. So it's going to be tú comías, él, ella, usted comía, nosotros comíamos. Please make sure that you are noticing the accents. Ellos, ellas, ustedes comían. And I look at my endings, I look at my cheat sheet, they should match, right? My endings are the same. For the verb vivir, which is an IR verb because it ends in IR, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go through 3 steps. I'm going to look at my cheat sheet or cheat chart, and I am going to conjugate or change this verb to live into the imperfecto or descriptive past tense. And when I go through the steps, I will get the following results. Yo vivía, tú vivías, él, ella, usted vivía, nosotros vivíamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes vivían. I'm going to really quickly go ahead and highlight these into blue so that you can see the endings in the imperfecto. It also gives you some extra time to copy down as I am speaking. Great, so you get the idea. My endings are going to be the same as my cheat sheet or cheat chart because I know that I am going to change these verbs into the imperfecto or sudden or descriptive past tense, So they should all match. And this is going to be the case for any verb that ends in AR, any verb that ends in ER, and any verb that ends in IR. So that concludes this lesson, chicos. Please make sure that you've either already printed these notes and copied as you were watching this video, or please make sure that you've also copied them down into your notebook, manually written by hand, because these notes will be very helpful for you with the rest of the assignments and quizzes. That is all for this lesson, chicos. Please make sure to rewind or repeat as many times as you need in order to feel comfortable with this material. There is nothing complicated about this. It is just simply about remembering the verb endings and remembering how to change verbs in Spanish. And that is it for this lesson. Adios.